Chapter 25 A Japanese Husband. As I look back, even over my short life, I see the repeated challenges of the new against the old, the perfect feminine in the old sense, trying to put down the struggles of the new feminine, aspiring to express itself in a progressive world. It was my own mother who regarded it as her great work to cast her daughter into the mold deemed so admirable by Occidental and Oriental philosophers. When my mother bought a kimono or an obi for me, she was always particular to select one elegantly quiet in color and design. I was not to look younger than I was actually, nor was I to be the focus of all eyes by reason of some splashing decoration in my apparel. If my garments were costly, the fact was not to be blatant. My manner she hoped to make accord with the refined modesty of my dress. My naive grace was the desired effect. Even my speech was to be free of such assertions as I think, I like, I want, I, the I never coming first, unlike the style of the Western girls. My mother warned me that I must listen to others always, smile at whatever they said, and express as little as possible of myself. While my mother was eager to make a dainty bride of me, the man I married was writing in his diary, "O God, bless my heart. If thy will is to make me thy faithful servant, and let me work to bring thy kingdom on earth, then select for me a wife with whom I shall work to bring glory to thy name." Again he wrote, "I am not hoping that my wife Shidzue will be a baroness of the sort depicted in fiction or drama, leading an elaborate life amid luxurious surroundings. What I really hope for her future is that she will concern herself with the great problems of her countrywomen." After our marriage, and while he found inspiration in working for labor, he watched with interest my growth in social consciousness. As soon as we had settled in a cottage in the coal mine district in western Japan, away from the traditions and complications of the old family system in Tokyo and its guardian mother-in-law, my husband began his constructive task of educating his girl bride into a real person. He insisted on my changing my attitude, even towards him, from a meek feudal wife to an alive, liberal, and understanding companion. He did not permit me to sit on the mat without a cushion as I had done in our Tokyo house. A true Japanese is supposed not to use a cushion in sitting before his elders, but assured me that I could behave as an equal. I must admit that I enjoyed the cushion. When he took a bath, I asked him whether he needed assistance, as is the way of a proper feudal wife, but he replied scornfully that he did not need a slave. His persistent call to me to rise from a stage too delightful to behold towards that of the self-conscious woman changed even my appearance. After his long and hard effort to put spirit into a doll-like creature, and just as his labor began to bear fruit, that is to say, just as I learned to express myself, my husband said to me one day that he thought my appearance was losing charm for him. Now he frankly declared that the beauty of a Japanese woman lay only in her naivety. He pointed to the delicate feminine figures in the old prince, pronouncing them his ideal. What a contradiction! After having so long admired the sturdy women of Millet and the powerful masterpieces of Rodin, he who once had undertaken to educate his wife with a view to making her as active and independent as any English or American woman, was now gloating over Japanese dolls in the old prince as types to emulate. But as my husband had always been ahead of his time, so his reaction against liberalism was a sign of the newest national tendency. It now seemed foolish in his eyes for a man to take off his hat in the elevator when a woman entered, to rise from his seat in a train if a woman were standing, or to help a woman carry parcels. He reverted to the good old ways of his people marked by masculine hauteur. The inferior sex could stick to its grace and modesty. He would not lift another finger to change habits and customs. What brought my husband to this sudden reversion of attitude? What made him move from one extreme to the other, from progressive to conservatism? He had been such a zealous crusader for human rights. He had been ready to risk everything in an effort to get into Russia, regardless of what this implied for his wife and children. And when he was prevented from seeing that great social experiment at first hand, his disappointment seemed deep and genuine. He had thrown in his lot with the laborers of Japan, sympathizing intellectually with their class war and aiding them directly in many ways. What had robbed him of conviction and loyalty to the common people? What had transformed him into an anti-feminist? His diagnosis of the movement of history seems to have been the basis of his mental and spiritual change. Having believed in a swift reconstruction of Japanese life from top to bottom, he was unprepared for the slow and tedious march of events towards that goal. As the reactionary forces at home grew bolder, he grew correspondingly discouraged, and soon felt that idealism had been irrevocably betrayed. Immediate realities curbed his imaginative flights, and eventually he was completely overcome by the influences of his burgess's environment. There he was at last, a mere man of aristocratic urban culture, captivated by the conventions of his own class. His second trip to America and Europe had driven him backward instead of forward, and nothing I could say or do or pray had any effect. He lost faith in the downfall of capitalism, within his lifetime at any rate, after he saw the status of the Western countries in 1924. It was disillusioning to the young Marxist, indoctrinated with the idea that capitalism was a frail thing, to discover how staunchly it was, to all appearances, entrenched despite the World War. On returning from his second trip to the West, my husband whitewashed his socialistic, internationalistic colors, and repainted them with vigorous nationalism. In this respect, too, he was a pioneer, adjusting himself to new conditions. He put aside all his work of a socialistic nature, and let the petty profit-seekers gather intimately around him. Having awakened from his romantic dream of quick social reconstruction, he was hungry for capitalistic enterprise, which lured him by its covering names of national policy and the reconstructive project of Great Japan. Now he laid a plan for rice field irrigation in Korea, for the establishment of a financial organ and a railway business in North Korea and East Manchuria, among other things. His money and his labor went into such schemes as these, but no enterprise, under the sun of capitalism, can flourish without profits, and this man, ingenious as he was in the realm of ideas, was less gifted in executive talent. Actual experience was also lacking as a basis of success. Naturally, record after record of failure struck fatal blows at the family fortunes, but he refused to admit defeat. He learned to picture himself as a great empire builder, a forerunner of Asiatic statesmen who were to play a new role in the mainland, especially in Manchuria. The more fixedly he bent his head in this direction, the more purely he symbolized Oriental heroics. In family life in Japan, as it must be everywhere, the husband's mental outlook directly affects the life of his wife. This ancient truth, known to my ancestors, of course, I now took to my heart. Hardly had I become conscious of myself when I had to face this reactionary wave at home. If the ensuing domestic problem and struggle had been but an isolated private affair, my melancholy plight would have been of little moment as a story, but my story is a common one among the present-day Japanese women who are trying to emerge from the condition of non-resistance to events, however meaningful, and take their place in the shaping of events in their own interest, in the interest of the race and of the nation. So in talking about myself, I am really talking about countless members of my sex in Japan. Several courses lay before me in the circumstances I've just described. I could try to forge straight ahead, working for the realization of my dreams as a social innovator. I could spurn my husband's protest and remind him bluntly of his own responsibility for my new interest and convictions. I could subside completely and revert, if I tried, to the type of feudal woman, beloved of my class. I could battle to restore my husband to the idealism of his youth, make him again the humanistic crusader, the man among men, his handsome aristocratic figure distinguished among copper-colored miners and other laborers as that of a person who owned himself, the strong individual able to work 12 hours a day in the dark pit and find satisfaction as a toiler, the guide and friend of woman in her effort to rise out of slavery. Images of his former power and charm floated before my eyes incessantly. So I chose the latter course. I attempted to win my husband again to the path he had believed enlightened. I thought that a seat in the House of Peers would enable him to give voice to his appreciation of the facts and problems staring him so starkly in the face, and that he could utilize his abundant knowledge of politics and economics in the interest of national progress. At the same time, I fancied that if he took his seat among the peers, he might give up harmful friends and assume new obligations. So I urged my husband to start a campaign for membership in the House of Peers. Now, this plan does not imply that such a campaign for membership in the upper house of the Japanese Diet is like an English contest for membership in the House of Commons, with English ladies openly and actively taking a hand for the seats in the upper house of the Japanese Parliament, are inherited by princes, marquises, and counts, while viscounts and barons receive this honor only through the unanimous vote of the peers of the same rank, over which the council of powerful elders within each rank has entire control. Naturally, a candidate must thus fulfill requirements pleasing to the conservative views of the elders. In this situation, I had to face a severe inner struggle of my own to advance my husband's status. When he discussed the proposed entry into the Diet, his friends with one accord insisted that the wife of a candidate for the House of Peers must absolutely conform to the feudal code. She must not talk about women's rights and women's personality. There could be no suffrage campaigning on her part. They scarcely needed to assure him that his wife could not work for birth control. There was clearly no chance for his winning a seat among the peers, so long as my dangerous thoughts continued to find expression. To give up all my social interest and maintain a dead silence, even within the narrow walls of home, was like being sentenced to prison. But my devotion to my husband, my effort to bring him back to his better self, made me pay any price for his sake. However, after paying the heavy cost of this campaign, opportunity for which comes only once in every 7 years, he failed to win the seat. It was claimed that his own 2 radical years were his handicap. It would be years now before he could live down his past sufficiently to stand again for the House of Peers. To expect membership in any case meant that his wife must hold aloof from social activities in the future. My co-workers in the social movement attempted to draw me out from this status of spiritual imprisonment, but I was determined first to regain domestic happiness. I never thought of sacrificing my husband's career for mine. Gladly I resolved to sacrifice mine for his. As I spent unhappy days in praying for a bright passage to open for my husband, he proceeded to discover a dark one leading in another direction. His injurious friends led him to shadowy corners. Their first idea was to remove him from my watching eyes. They made every effort to keep him away from his family. Geisha and the tea houses were the fortresses for these men in this gloomy battle, fortresses which his wife could not assault. My husband had been and still is a very honest man. He has been unable to doubt other people, whom he always takes to be just as honest as himself. This good nature of his is found in many men who have been brought up in the wealthy or well-to-do families of Japan, and this simplicity led Baron Ishimoto more and more into the entanglements of a dishonest and complex society. With the worldwide depression, financial difficulties arose and grew until they overwhelmed him. He thought that he must not let his wife know the real state of his finances, and instead of telling everything frankly and counting on a natural approach to the solution of difficulties, he resorted to proud defiance or sullen silence as a way out. In his effort not to lose the honorable husband's dignity, he conducted himself almost like one deprived of reason. So after all, I had a regular feudal lord at home. The only thing that was absent from the picture was the perfect feudal wife. The days and months wore on, as if we were traveling over a desert, but my devotion to my husband never changed. I continued to pray that I might be able to rejuvenate idealism along progressive lines. I aspired to conduct myself as far as could be done, according to what is taught in the book of great learning for women to which I have referred. It was not because I approved of this blind feudal code as such, but only because it seemed to offer the only means of restoring a friendship held so precious and vital. To my infinite regret, the gentler I tried to be, the harsher was my failure in reaching the goal of rehumanizing my husband. Often the image of a grindstone came to my mind during those trying years, as if I were set to polish it with patient and unerring labor. But I had other tasks, as well as grindstones to think about those days. So many duties dropped upon my shoulders. My husband's interest in the railway works in the northern border of Korea and in Manchuria deepened, and most of the time he left me alone except for financial problems, while he traveled about, bent on elaborate business schemes, dreaming about Cecil Rhodes in South Africa, writing Chinese poems dedicated to Prince Ito, the man who succeeded in annexing Korea to Japan. It was during his many trips to Korea and Manchuria that he published pamphlets taking for their theme Japan's national policies in relation to Manchuria and Mongolia. With his historical knowledge of the East and the West combined with ideas of Japan's future economy, he looked forward to a national drive towards the huge natural wealth in Manchuria and Mongolia, declaring in his fiery manner, like a pioneer and prophet, that to exploit this unutilized land and wealth was the true mission for the Japanese nation. Meanwhile, he wrote me no real letter to console my lonely and difficult days at home, nor did he let me know what he was actually doing. The happiness of wife and children was a trifling matter for a man who was solving great national problems and framing national policy. Tenderness would be a disgrace in an Oriental hero at work on a state issue. There could be no wasting of affection on one who was only a wife and a woman. I heard from him very seldom, and when I did, his letter was written on a long piece of rice paper, with India ink and brush, filled with the most exaggerated form of the classical Chinese expressions, representing the stiff formality of the old school. He seemed to have forgotten that I was his wife. The thorough orientalization of my husband made me recall the story of a wise emperor in ancient China, who during the time when he was a loyal subject, entrusted with the diking of a great river, was so heroically absorbed in the public work that he passed the front of his own house 3 times without once entering it during the 3 years of his responsibility. It has often been considered a great virtue, or even been taken as a matter of course, for a man to neglect or sacrifice his family for a noble cause. When I replied, with news of what I had been doing for my husband and for the family during his absence, mentioning some of the difficulties and anxieties, the answer was, "Want to be only a few lines stating casually that the Japanese nation will be grateful to you, as I consider you meritorious in managing the difficult family affairs, as a good wife should do to help her husband, who is fighting in the front line in behalf of a national policy." Great heaven, I never thought of being recognized by the nation. My dreams soared no higher than acknowledgment by my dear husband. This did not come, and my heart was finally broken. One day, when I felt as if I were plodding through mental darkness, I received a postal telegram from my husband in which he very abruptly said, "A bear is arriving in Tokyo Station by express this evening. Go and get it." Was he planning to establish a zoo in our small garden beside this crowded street of Tokyo? I asked myself. Or was it just a stuffed bear to be a toy for the children? I was not sure of my husband's recent state of mind, as I could not guess at it through his inexpressive Chinese letters of grand formality. However, I had no time to speculate. I had to prepare at once to welcome this strange guest from Korea. Taking one of my younger brothers and my 2 little sons with me to help fetch this fearful present, I went to the station. We had entrance tickets, and on the platform we waited, half-dazed, for the express train to arrive. As usual, in an old community like Tokyo, one's circle of acquaintances is large. Thus I met several people whom I knew well, and we exchanged greetings. "Is somebody arriving?" they asked me. "Yes, I came to meet." I could hardly say that I had come to meet Mr. Bear of Korea. Busily and happily, all the passengers left the train after their long journey from the western edge of Japan proper. We were still standing on the deserted platform as if we had missed somebody. "There it is, Mother! The bear!" came a sudden cry. The children had discovered a big wooden cage being carried out from a freight car in the rear. On one side of the cage, a large inscription, "Baron Ishimoto's possession," and beneath this were a few words in smaller letters saying, "Give him water as soon as he arrives." I was quite embarrassed when the baggage master came up and told me that he had been asked to deliver this unusual cargo by the Shimonoseki station master, who is in turn had received instructions from a provincial governor of Korea. This governor, a friend of my husband, had given him the bear. It was one he himself had hunted in the mountain. The bear, a large brown one, peering through the iron bars, nodded his head to everyone who was watching him with the most cheerful manner, as if he felt no fatigue after his long journey. But when I got nearer to it, I was almost stunned by its terrible smiling. My sons were excited and fed him with the pieces of biscuits they had brought from home as a welcome for their new friend, Master Korean Bear. The procession home began. It consisted of a truck and a motor car. Through the crowded and gay evening streets of Tokyo, it made its way and disbanded at our gate. Our young maids were frightened when they encountered this happy animal and its tremendously dirty smell. That which annoyed me most was the fragile look of the cage, which suggested the danger of this wild beast escaping. So that night I had the bear placed in the dark small barn in the corner of our backyard, where we kept our charcoal and firewood, and I wanted to close the door of the barn so that I could sleep safely, at least until the next morning. The children were not satisfied with their mother's treatment of the animal. However, both Arata and Tamio insisted that if we closed the door of the barn so tightly, the bear would be uncomfortable in the stuffy air. We must leave the door open, they said. Arata, the elder one, eagerly started to draw a plan for a concrete cage, wide enough for the bear to move about freely. He even designed a spare room for the animal to go into while the other part was being cleaned. The children were friendly and trustful toward the beast, universal traits of the young. Soon, The bear had a new cage, a little larger and stronger than the former one, but it was not the ideal imagined by the children. I had to tell them that I had no intention of keeping the wild beast around the house so intimately in this crowded city life. When it turned warmer, the smell of the animal became almost intolerable, and when I tried to clean the cage with a long-handled brush and a hose, the bear took in everything he could catch with his paws and pulled it into the corner of his cage, where he kept his trophies in a heap. He gnawed the hose and pulled it about. His strength was so great, and his growling was so fearful, that I could not make headway against him. At times he was very amiable and ate well. We fed him with cooked rice, potatoes, beans, and sweets. He was fond of bananas, oranges, and every kind of nuts. The children fed him with their own fresh fruits from the table, while their mother was thrifty and fed him only with leftovers. When summer came, the bear was less active unless we urged him to move by turning the hose on him twice or 3 times a day. This took much time and care. I wrote letters to the masters of several zoos and of some circus shows asking whether they would be interested in adopting this untamed member of our family, but no one was. Once some men came and looked at the animal. A brown bear, uninteresting, was their verdict. All others said the same thing. They were not interested unless the animal was of an unusual type. During this time we had to move once, carrying this unwieldy object with us. Finally, after 7 months, I succeeded in giving it to one of the small zoos in a country town. I suppose Mr. Korean Bear is still nodding and eating there in the country zoo, delighting other children with his cheerful manner. My husband's interest in wild animals was as strong as his enthusiasm for a great national policy. It was his delight to hunt wild beasts wherever he happened to be traveling and send home his catch. It was my dutiful delight to take care of them until I could dispose of them courteously. One day I saw the picture of a beautiful pair of wild deer in the Asahi graph, beneath which it was stated that these deer were to be an honorable present to a royal prince from Baron Ishimoto. I was frightened, anticipating the care of another set of wild animals, when our dear bear had not yet been disposed of, in spite of every effort. My husband came back shortly before these deer arrived. The female deer was pretty sick at the end of her long trip by water from the northern border of Korea, on account of the want of exercise and proper food, but the 2 were elegant creatures as compared with the plebeian bear. Even if they did require good care, it would be a shame if we failed to present these animals to the prince, since the gift had been announced to the public in the graph. My husband left this heavy responsibility entirely to me, and I did not feel equal to the burden. The male deer was about 5 feet high and had a pair of horn bags on the top of his head. The female was shorter than her mate and gentle-looking, with a white and brown dotted skin. Her round black eyes shone beautifully like obsidian jewels. I liked this aristocratic-looking animal with its clean habits much better than our dirty bear, as it was impossible for them to get enough exercise in our narrow garden. We had to close both the front and the back gate once in the morning, and once in the afternoon, and let the pair race free for a while in the whole enclosure, around the kitchen, in front of our drawing room, or behind the closed gate. It would have been splendid to fasten chains on their elegant necks, and take them for a walk in the park, to start a new fashion, but these animals were too wild to let us get as close to them as that. When the children were at home, they loved to take care of the deer, but their school hours were so long that they could not attend to the job except on Sundays. So the maids and I had to drive the deer, after the animals had taken daily exercise, into their cage, which stood beside the bears. The female deer was very meek, and got into her place easily, but the male rascal ran here and there all around the yard, every time his turn came to get back into his cage. He never behaved well. While they were loose, they ate all the leaves from the trees in the garden, both the dead brown leaves on the ground and the green ones on the branches. Finally, they bit even the young branches in the wild manner which they had enjoyed in the wilderness of the North Korea mountains. For the sake of their health, we had to indulge them, every day adding to the number of bare trees, while I was working to get the royal prince's consent to accept Baron Ishimoto's gift, an approval which had to pass through much red tape and formality. The spring came with every bud and sprout bursting from their long winter sleep. The horn bags of the male deer, which looked like wens, daily grew larger until they were broken and a pair of real antlers appeared, becoming taller and taller, and spreading out like beautiful tree branches on his head. As his horns grew, the animal became wilder, kicking, jumping, charging right and left, and running after the female deer in a mad way which brought an unspeakable worry and fear to me. One late afternoon, in those windy spring days, familiar in Tokyo, as I was about to change my kimono for an outing, above the creaking of glass windows and paper screens, which trembled every time the strong wind shook them, I heard the scream of a kitchen maid, while another one dashed breathlessly into my dressing room. The strong wind blowing against the poor back door of the yard, she said, had weakened the latch of the gate. Finally it gave way completely, permitting the male deer to race into the street. While he was giving a fine demonstration of fast running to the city people, the kitchen maid was dashing after the animal, crying, "Help, help!" Helpless, I thought, what shall I do? The promised gift to the royal prince was running away. The next moment I, too, ran out on the street, with my sash half fastened. Men, women, errand boys, and children all stopped to watch this strange sight. The animal fled swiftly until he came to the wide thoroughfare where he saw the tram cars and motor cars rushing by. These must have terrified the country fellow, for he turned back through the narrow street. My faithful young O-Shin bravely shouted still, "Help, everybody on the street." And she added, "He won't bite you, so help me please." The people who heard that the animal would not hurt them gathered together and made a human fence as a barrier against the racing deer, with its fearful-looking horns. Finally the rascal was caged once more. When the pair of wild deer were accepted by the prince, a great honor for my husband, of course, I was at least relieved of the great burden. The royal prince took the animals to one of his huge estates. Recently this estate was presented to the city of Tokyo. Chapter 26. Escape in the philosophy of caricature. The residential quarter in Tokyo can be very dead on a winter night. On one such night, I was sitting, as usual, on a cushion on the mat floor of my room, leaning over the charcoal fire, and the brazier with an open book on my lap. The children were asleep, and the maids had retired to their rooms. I was looking into the pages of the book, but concentrating all my attention that I might not miss the rumbling sound of my husband's motor car outside the gate. Indeed, I thought it over, and over again last night. A woman was sang in my book, written by Ape Okamoto, a popular cartoonist. Taki-san is a good man, but he makes me mad by his looseness. If I want to talk to him heart to heart, he makes fun of the effort and turns it into a mess. If I weep, he says gosh, and goes out. Is that the nature of men? The woman continued. Oh, I wish I could meet a man even once in my life who would turn his whole heart to me, no matter how slow or stupid he might be. Am I wishing too much, wanting to find such a man in this world? This was the wife of a sandwich man, complaining about her merry husband. I turned the pages. An old priest appeared to chat quietly with the village lads and women gathered around a fire. To them he remarked, "The way of Yukio, this fleeting world, is crooked, curved, and twisted. If you try to go forward, straight ahead into it, I am sure you will dash your head against the wall, and you will disgust and be disgusted, losing every bit of charm in life." The simple and plain speech of the aged country priest led me to investigate further the cartoonist Arthur's philosophy of life. In its light, I began to take stock of myself. I saw myself as a young woman stepping out from the warm guardianship of my mother, under the gentle protection of my father, to sail my boat onward and onward, always with a favorable breeze aiding me, until my good luck ended. There I was, lost in melancholy and grief. Indeed, I despaired of everything in life. The world seemed twisted round, just as the old village priest was saying to his neighbors. When my broken spirit was floundering in the dark valley of despair, the book of the cartoonist, with its delicious drawings and humorous view of life, suggested to me a way of escape. It taught me to laugh at life, tease it, smile at it, and scold at it too. I had been shown many angles of vision, but here was a perspective revivifying in its freshness and geniality. Now I felt able to cut a path through the marsh of skepticism. I was strengthened again to look at the world with a fresh attitude. A striking idea sprang up in my mind. A man says in another story, written by the cartoonist philosopher, "Let's dance, let's dance. Let us all dance and laugh at our ignorant selves." Yes, let's dance and laugh, putting everything together. Business, fortune, happiness, and even gods and Buddhas, putting all together to dance and laugh. Let's laugh at the whole of life. A character in this tale who was honestly simple and seriously suffering in this world of cruel inconsistency finally turned to folk dancing for relief. Well, start at once. A teacher of jolly folk dancing commands his melancholic patient. Boys and girls who come to me to learn dancing are all like you, being persons with delicate nerves, but possessing a large worm in the stomach, than others which makes them provoked and disgusted, this being a Japanese belief. Let's dance happily and merrily. The command fascinated me. I began to dance too, but the woman, patient, suffering from melancholia, did not make her choice of a teacher versed in the rollicking folk dances. She selected one of the prominent masters of the Hanayagi school of dancing, an old-fashioned art. Hanayagi and Fujima are the two main inherited forms of symbolical rhythm, underlying all the dancing and gesturing on the kabuki stage. When one begins to study the centuries-old, complicated, but extremely aesthetic rules behind the kabuki drama, which include formulas for coloring, costuming, singing, the playing of instruments, dancing, and making gestures, one is surprised at the infinitely varied phases of this art. A closer and longer study inevitably creates intense enthusiasm for it. I needed to study as well as to dance. A friend of mine introduced me to Tokutaro Hanayagi, one of the leading teachers of the dance. It was my first peep into this circle of Japanese society. I had been taught the feudal social manners, but here was tradition of another kind, preserved unchanged for centuries. It bore a close relation to what the Japanese call the flower and willow society, which I mentioned in connection with the tea houses. This theater circle stands quite apart from the intellectual circle of present-day Japan, the latter being so much influenced by Western ideas and manners, the former so purely Eastern, that I was received almost like a stranger when I called upon the dancing master, whose house, nevertheless, was near the main thoroughfare, the Ginza. This being a new adventure on my part, I took with me the cultured wife of a well-known businessman of Tokyo. Each of us wrapped a certain sum of money in thick white rice paper, tied it with a red and white cord, and under the cord, as decoration, we slipped a lucky symbol in the center of which we wrote a humble cake. This was going to be our offer to the teacher of an entrance fee. The relation between the dancing master and his pupils is more feudalistic than I had expected. As a master of the inherited art, the teacher is almighty in the school, and pupils are placed in the position of disciples, rendering absolute obedience. When I began to study the kabuki drama, the teacher and his wife, both excellent dancers, had several young men and women living with them. These were their real disciples, endeavoring to equal the master. The lessons went on from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, every day. There was stepping, gliding, and turning all the time on the platform floor, no matter how slowly the depression was lifting in the outside world. Love nature animals, birds, ghosts, gods, and Buddhas. In a word, everything in the universe was beautifully symbolized on the kabuki stage. The disciples who lived with the teacher were bound to him by a contract of practical servitude for a certain length of time, perhaps for 3 or 5 years. He, on his part, undertook to make them instructors of this art within that time. Many were sent to him by their parents. They not only learned the art, but they did the dusting and cleaning of the house and waited on the master and his guests. Other pupils were mostly geisha girls, both young and mature. A few children of the kabuki actors were enrolled on the books. The master, almighty in the dancing house, instructed the pupils in the technique of stage love-making, humming as he did so amorous sonnets of a human warmth not permitted in the rigid family fold. The instruction hall was always packed with gaily dressed, pretty girls interspersed with boys. When one opened the entrance door of the house, one would see on the stone floor of the porch rows and rows of colored wooden clogs, red, brown, and black lacquered, or matte covered with silk or velvet toe pieces. The flaunting hues of these might create suspicion about the manners within the school, but everybody behaved quietly and solemnly, as if he or she were in some religious temple. The girls never chatted with one another, or sat in a relaxed pose, while they were waiting for their turn at the lesson. They watched eagerly what others were learning. In the presence of the master, all the students were reverential, and to my surprise, the girls waiting on him were happy to bring him a cup of tea or to fan him, anticipating his smallest desire. The teacher seldom spoke, but always the girls read his mind through his facial expression. A strict code of etiquette prevailed. If anyone should violate it, he would be immediately expelled from the circle. With the advance of democracy, we may lose the advantage of discipline before we have really assimilated the advantage of liberty. And democratic interpretateness can be observed in many phases of contemporary Japanese life. The menace of social conditions worse than those which marked feudalism is not a thing to be lightly dismissed. Our teacher wisely guessed that the two new pupils would not have the courage to take their first lesson in the presence of the watchful geisha. So we were asked to wait until the other lessons were over. Then the teacher asked us to stand upon the stage platform. We bowed to him politely again and did as we were bid. We were asked which song we preferred to try as a start. I was confused, for I knew almost no song of this school. My previous life had never allowed me to become acquainted with love sonnets. But how could I say to him that I was there as a miserable patient, who was seeking some medicine or treatment to make her life happier? My dancing mate was a naturally cheerful little lady, but she was seriously disturbed about the geisha who were stealing so much of her precious husband's time and money. As neither of us could give any proper answer to the teacher, he chose a song for us to start with, a dance of Kamuro. Kamuro were the little girls of 6 or 7 who waited on the grand courtesans in the gay quarters of the Tokugawa days. Their duties consisted of bringing and filling tobacco pipes, and fetching other small things to the mistress, who was attended by 10 or 15 of these little girls. As we see on the kabuki stage depicting that older time, the dancing of a little girl of that age, with a battledore and shuttlecock in her hands, is utterly innocent and ingenious. It sounds simple, but in reality it is difficult and interesting enough for a great actor, such as Kikugoro, to perform in the popular theater of our day. Kikugoro, now the greatest kabuki dancer, who is middle-aged and weighs 200 pounds, still takes this little girl's part so charmingly that one forgets he is not a real Kamuro, but a lady 5 feet and 4 inches tall, 3 times bigger than a Kamuro should be, struggling with her long limbs to symbolize a little girl of the gay quarters, looked ridiculous beyond measure at the dancing school. She and I could not help laughing at each other's funny style. When I saw my partner on the stage, dressed up in a dandy manner, with his front teeth so ill-placed, the reader must realize what ill-placed Japanese teeth look like. I could not help bursting into laughter. I recalled a passage in my cartoon story, and the jolly teacher in the story remarked, scoldingly, "Listen, don't show sensitiveness." It took me some time to cast off all self-consciousness and try to become a faithful depictor of human life through the dance. My friend and I, wiping our faces, necks, arms perspiring as if we had been in a race, bowed again when our first lesson was over. Before we left the teacher, we asked about the fee. He replied gently, "In our circle we do not sell our art for money. I cannot calculate my art in terms of silver." He still remains aloof from the commercialization of his art. We were so grateful for his instruction, however, that we made up a purse containing more than the average sum bestowed upon him by his pupils. While I was absorbed in studying this art as gracefully as I could, but energetically, I regained strength and my melancholia lessened. Besides succeeding in my primary purpose, I had mastered a number of stage performances and added to my knowledge of the native culture, a profit and a joy for me. Although my melancholia was somewhat alleviated by the dispersal of the gloomy cloud in the performance of my dancing, I did not regain true mental happiness while my relations with my husband were dangling in the air. It may have been burdensome to him to have a wife whose disposition was not meek enough to be controlled under an absolute despotism, but apparently in his mind busily occupied with varied enterprises. With his ancient Oriental attitude of heroism, with his interest in wild animals, my kind of wife had no place. She could not slip into his heart again. During the later years of this unstable situation, I began to take part in such social activities as the woman's suffrage movement, but my mind was more concerned with family problems than with public duties. One day I was invited to go to Kobe to speak about women's enfranchisement, the question being agitated in a lively fashion. I was glad to go on this occasion, because my husband was then just coming back from Korea after spending a severe winter in the heavy snow, struggling with a railway construction problem. Not only the weather, which had been severe, but the whole condition of his business was unfavorable, and he had to return uncomfortable and humiliated. With the deepest sympathy, I wanted to welcome him at the station, so after I had finished my talk in Kobe, I waited for his train from the west and met him. An intimate friend of ours, who was then living in Kobe, suggested are going to Arima Hot Springs, over the ridge of the Rocco Mountains, to rest. I thought it would be a rare occasion for me to talk quietly and honestly with my husband. Our friend kindly led the way to Arima, about 2 hours' drive from Kobe, up hills and into the mountains. We stopped at a neat-looking Japanese inn. All of us enjoyed the mountain springs, and we spent the afternoon together in a cozy little mat room with a tastefully decorated tokonoma in the corner. There was a garden in front of the room, and a big magnolia tree with its tightly closed buds casting shadows on the white shoji screens. A nightingale was singing, hopping from branch to branch on the tree, without knowing that we were looking at its shadow from behind the closed shoji. A peaceful atmosphere governed the room. There, on the mat, was set a kotatsu, a firebox resting on and covered with thickly padded silk quilts to keep our feet warm. A quiet conversation was begun. Our friend surprised me by saying to my husband suddenly, "Don't you think that Japanese wives are, as a rule, too much neglected by their husbands? I think a man should consider it a duty to open his mind to his wife and consult with her as to what he is going to do in the future, or what he is doing at present." My husband was silent. I was holding my breath, wondering what this spokesman in my interest was going to say next. The spokesman who voluntarily entered the list for me without premeditation. "Times have changed," she went on. "No one of us present-day Japanese women will be happy if she is ignored intellectually and expelled from being her husband's mental companion." "I have a different opinion from yours, my dear madame," my husband replied. "A man likes to keep his ideas and ambitions sacred and solemn in the inner court of his heart. There lies man's heroic conceit. Solitude is the pride of strong men. In the history of our great forefathers, or the ancient Chinese heroes, I have never heard of a single man so despicable as to confide his ambition to his woman. It spoils masculine heroism. It will ruin great enterprises." "Oh no, that's not fair," the lady was excited. "You treat women without sympathy. You don't understand their problems. You are ignoring woman's intelligence, sensitiveness, and even disturbing her heart. If she were ignorant, if she were uneducated, if she had no sense of right judgment, your philosophy might be justified. But I do not think this is the case, Baron." She pressed her argument. I did not utter a word. "It's man's selfishness, too much egoism. He expects his wife to stand every phase of hardship as his partner. Men today count on their wives being intelligent enough to bring up their children, while they neglect to treat their wives as persons. It is customary for wives to cooperate with their husbands to an extent where, with any mishap occurring, the wife is to be blamed equally with the master of the family, and if that is the position woman has to take in our society, naturally she should be trusted to look into every corner of her husband's mental life. Please go ahead, my dear woman suffragist. I don't care what other men think or do. I won't follow suit. No, madame, never shall I be weak enough to have to consult a woman." My husband laughed. "Oh, dear Baron, you are being very narrow-minded," he was told. "I am sorry that you don't understand the psychology of Oriental men. But, madame, I shall never agree with you or follow your advice on my attitude towards my wife. The spring sun vanished quickly behind the shadow of the hills, and the room was getting dark. The nightingale had flown away while we were arguing around the fire. Gloom settled over us, and my heart was heavy under the pressure of despair. My friend called a maid to bring in a samisen, and she tried to create cheer with her music. But my heart only sank into a depth of sorrow with the realization of a broken love. From the early days of my marriage, I had followed my husband's pace. From humanism to liberalism and realism to radicalism, I continued. And now I had to realize that I was unable to follow him any farther on his way to Oriental heroism. I had to determine to give up trying to follow and let my husband go alone on his way with my prayers to a kind providence. This was indeed a tragic conclusion to my married life, as it had started with such happiness and enthusiasm. However, it had to be accepted, with the sorrow of a broken love, but with gratitude to the man who had been my guide towards mental maturity. I set out on a path of thought and action alone. Part 10. What Buddhism Offered. Chapter 27. Sex and Religious Attitudes. It is natural for the suffering soul to seek solace in religion. Try as I might to cure my melancholy by dancing and laughing at the humors of life, light diversion proved inadequate. I longed for unbetraying truth and spiritual contentment. If Buddha would but open his benign arms, I felt that I could throw myself upon his infinitely wide and deep bosom and find peace. My heart was being starved by lack of nourishment, in the hope that it might develop harmoniously with my reason, giving new strength for life. I drew nearer to Buddhism. Up to this time, I had been indifferent to religion, like most of the people around me. In the early part of the Tokugawa feudal regime, Christianity was rigorously driven from the island empire, because our rulers thought it had brought too much trouble in our politics, and in order to abolish this newly introduced religion, they persecuted its devotees, and many Christian martyrs died in Japan. This policy of the Tokugawa shogunate forced every Japanese family to be registered in one or other of the sects of Buddhism, the established national faith. Thus, Buddhism entrenched itself in the family system. It remains the pivot of our social system. The Buddhist religion has thus been taken for granted and has evoked very little critical thinking about the soul. Religious rites have been performed punctiliously, not intellectually. According to our official history, Buddhism came to Japan in the 6th century AD, and the Japanese people have done with this exotic religion what they have done with everything that has been brought to them from abroad. Buddhism was accepted simply, humbly, in a sincere and almost childlike fashion by the Japanese, but they laid the stamp of their own transforming genius upon it. It immediately made converts among the Mikados and in the royal circle. After many centuries of development under their powerful patronage, and with the appearance of great scholars and saints among its priests, Buddhism became Japanized and made definite contributions to the world's religious thought and to its byproduct, the arts. Since the Meiji era, however, with its constitutional guarantee of religious freedom, Japan has been friendly to Christianity, and a considerable amount of capital and intense spiritual effort have been expended in missionary work in the heathen land. Christian missionaries have succeeded in establishing schools and hospitals. They have several 100,000 Christians in Japan to their credit. On the other hand, Buddhism, although it is not now an official state religion, has been rooted in Japan for centuries. Approximately 75,000 temples and 150,000 clergy are registered in its books, and nearly 60 million adherents profess loyalty to its tenets. Truly, so far as religious organization is concerned, Japan is one of the largest Buddhist countries in the world today. Under the influence of Buddhism, for centuries most of our daily habits and even our racial traits have been molded. Generally speaking, tenacity is not a striking characteristic of the Japanese people, and its absence I attribute to Buddhism, which has taught us fatalism. The fatalist view maintains that our present life is the karma of a previous existence, and that the same law of causality will operate for continuous reincarnation, the nature of which will depend on what we do or desire for ourselves now. The concept behind our endeavor to build fine habits and conduct ourselves well is happiness in the next world, not the betterment of the present world. A certain kind of behavior may lead us to reincarnate as cats, another as monkeys. The dogs barking at our feet may have been princes or even kings, who did not act in ways conducive to a human existence. Fatalism holds that the parent and child relation is limited to this world only, while the husband and wife relation continues to the next world, which will be a shock to some people. Our present life, as Buddhism visualizes it, is too frail and pitiable to be inspiring. The moon is easily overshadowed by the clouds, and cherry blossoms are often disturbed by cross winds, while in full bloom. Thus, uncertainty is the rule of life. In this fashion, we are wont to begin letters of condolence to friends and relatives bowed with grief. I was taught to make this salutation a fixed ritual. This conception of the uncertainty of life coincides with our sensitiveness to all sorts of natural phenomena, certainly a striking characteristic of the Japanese. Japanese Buddhism has had tremendous influence on the whole nation. There were periods in its history when that influence was invigorating, but after being protected by the Tokugawa government as part of its state policy, Buddhism became decadent, flattering the powerful through Confucian accretions. Japanese Buddhism grew formalistic, preaching only conventional virtues, forgetting its original role as a critical philosophy of behavior and a profound philosophy of the universe. So its priests have for some time been emphasizing in Japan the negative virtues, such as endurance, self-repression, restraint, a code of resignation, and subjection which offers nothing but sadness for the soul. My mother declares that she does not like the smell of incense or joss sticks, that it makes her gloomy. Many people have the same feeling. indicating the true effect of Buddhism on the human spirit, however expressionless the Japanese face may appear. Buddhist teachers have had very little to say about the problems of the practical world. They do not touch individual life and thought in that relation. They betray no positive understanding of love between man and woman. On the contrary, they belittle woman by insisting that it is as hard for a woman to become a Buddha as it is for a rich man to enter the Christian heaven. Buddhism upholds the following doctrine. 1. That life is pain. 2. That the law of predestination rules 3 worlds. One's pre-existence, which, if unfortunate or evil, causes the present existence to be full of trouble, and the future existence will be determined by the present one. 3. That constant effort should be made to accumulate good traits for the sake of a better life in the next incarnation. 4. The cause of sorrow is desire. So long as one has endless worldly aspirations, there is an everlasting struggle leading nowhere. Though they may be superficial in so interpreting Buddhism, the Japanese take the doctrine at its face value. They revere the images of Buddha. They send contributions to the temples and priests. They try to be benevolent, even if only on a small scale. A calculating person may donate money to temples when he gets old, asking that favorable prayers be offered for his salvation in the Pure Land, to which he cannot carry his purse. The poor offer their manual labor to temples, and the public works connected with them, believing that Buddha will recognize their humble devotion expressed in this way. This low, general level of Buddhist instruction has irritated the intellectual Japanese, and the preaching of the Buddhist priest has lost its dignity for them. The modern generation has largely outgrown the influence of this gospel in its old form. Recently there has arisen new Buddhist movements imitating the propagandistic measures of Christian enterprises, sending missionaries and social workers all over the world on the tide of the Pan-Asiatic movement. This new Japanese Buddhism reveals innovations in doctrine, such as the righteousness of sex equality. It is building its temples in modern-style architecture with Otis elevators to carry the bronze images of Buddha. Its leaders preside over Pan-Pacific Buddhist conferences. It has the semblance of an attempt to introduce Americanism into Buddhism by destroying the ancient charm of quietness common to all Oriental religions, and introducing the nervous rush and uproar more characteristic of Occidental faith. But its future is still in doubt. How far it can go in this direction, and how much social leadership it can exercise, remain problematical. On the other hand, religious lethargy has been more and more noticeable among the Japanese during recent decades. There are those who see no inconsistency in marrying and vowing loyalty to the spirit of General Nogi at the Nogi Shrine in Tokyo, formerly the residence of the heroic general, and now a popular place for wedding ceremonies and burying their dead, according to the Buddhist sutra, chanting and burning incense. But the conquest of spiritual matters by the almighty force of modern science has created a new trend of thought, among the intellectual Japanese, away from any sort of traditional religious formality. This may be illustrated in the will of my uncle, who ordered that his funeral ceremony be performed in an aeroplane entirely apart from sutras and incense vapors. This uncle, who passed away a few years ago, was an electrical engineer and had been president of one of the government technical schools. His will stated that there should be no religious rites at his death, no gravestone to mark his burial place. His body was to be cremated in a modern manner, and his ashes scattered in the air from a plane. His widow and sons were willing to carry out the funeral according to the will, but the police objected, saying that there was no precedent and that it would bring confusion in police regulations if many people began to follow this strange fashion. So my uncle's will was not fully executed, but the box containing his ashes was carried into the sky on an airplane and was tossed overboard to land at the center of the school ground, amid the cheers of his students. Though my uncle had desired that the clouds of mystery and divinity surrounding the dead be dispersed by his attitude, his wife sorrowfully complains to us that she has no temple or graveyard to which she can take flowers in memory of her husband. She is released, however, from the trouble of repeating the complicated anniversary memorial service for the dead. I did not approve my uncle's revolutionary funeral arrangement, for I felt sympathetic with his wife, who was denied the opportunity of experiencing the spiritual significance of his death while the airplane roared his farewell. Too swift a modernization of Japan, and the Japanese may be in danger. In planning modern cities, for instance, there is the temptation to abhor venues of fine old cherry and pine trees and destroy the arc-shaped classical bridges, simply to do something new. The beauty of many old things would be charming even in modernized towns. Viewing religion from this angle, though there are many aspects of Buddhism with which I am not sympathetic, it has an appeal for me, just as one loves to keep an old and cherished habit, even though it may be a useless one. My husband taught me to read the Bible of the Christians in the early days of our married life, but it gave me the feeling of reading a book of alien sentiments, and I always missed something there. My uncles seemed to make a great point of their funerals. Another and younger one had a Christian burial. He had been consul general in one of the cities of the United States. Called back from this post, he was ill in bed for a whole year. While he was prostrate at Kamakura, his wife succeeded in converting her dying husband to Christianity, and a minister was asked to baptize him shortly before his death. So my uncle's spirit found a place in the Christian heaven. His funeral took place in a church so simple as to resemble a barracks. A young minister presided over the ceremony, reciting prayers in the modern Japanese language. The words sounding uncouth in their direct transliteration from the English Christian vocabulary. A harsh air reigned in the crude church. Such imagery as the Good Shepherd, lamb, and green pastures were utterly incomprehensible to the Japanese mourners, who had never seen sheep except in the zoo. There was no sweet and solemn emotion such as springs from ceremonies in our historical temples of Buddha or in the Christian cathedrals of the West. This miserable service made me realize the weakness of words. I recalled the high solemnity of my grandfather's funeral, which was performed in an old Zen sect temple in Tokyo. How impressed I was by the sight of the noble-looking priest in their robes of gorgeous silk brocade, indicating high ecclesiastical dignity, followed by rows and rows of other priests in purples, greens, browns, and yellows, each in a different costume, glittering with silver and gold, advancing slowly and softly in snow-white tabassocks over the tan, matte floor of the temple hall. They moved with measured steps, according to the formalities of the rite, reciting numbers of Sanskrit sutras in unison to the accompaniment of various holy instruments. I looked once more at my grandfather's coffin at the north side center of the hall, decorated with numerous artificial lotus blossoms of gold, silver, and white, all enveloped in thick vapors of burning incense. The tall gilt image of Shakyamuni on the dark altar gazed down benignly on the coffin, and with magnificent gestures the priest handed over the dead to the merciful Buddha. The sutra chanting lasted long, and no lay person understood what it meant at all. But I never tired of this grand performance, which certainly elevated the mind and soul as one knelt in silent prayer for the friendly acceptance of the departed spirit into Buddha's land. In his book, The Pilgrimage of Buddhism, J.B. Pratt discusses the mysterious power of language, pointing out that one's speech may obstruct the meaning of one's own soul. For the human being, it is more than any of his verbal assertions. In this sense, the Protestant prayers loudly uttered in church are like the puerilities of school children in the classroom. It is this essential inadequacy of language to the inner life which explains the very real advantage which a foreign and sacred tongue so often possesses in the expression of religious emotion. I fully agree. Pratt says again that reverent sounds, which are to the worshipper both less and more than words, do not compel him to sign on any dotted line, or to confine his meaning to any stable proposition. They suggest but do not hide. They are like music. From my uncle's Protestant Christian funeral, we were finally rescued by Ave Marie, played on a violin, an instrument which my uncle cherished to the last moment of his life. A celebrated woman musician added this fine touch. My search for a satisfying temple took some time. There are in Tokyo many temples, with holy-looking priests, but none of them caught my heart at once. I love the old Zen sect temple, in whose graveyard the ashes of my ancestors lie peacefully under the ancient trees. Its priests are impressive at funerals or Bon festivals, but they failed to convince me that they were my spiritual guides. My mother's family temple, to which I occasionally go to visit my grandparents' graves, is tended by young and old nuns clad in black robes and bonnets, that impart charm and grace to their small shaved heads, but they look too delicately simple for me to put before them such a problem as the salvation of one soul. As a member of the Ishimoto family, I am supposed to belong to a temple of Jodoshu, Pure Land sect, at Hakusan, Tokyo, but I have regarded that temple and its priest as a part merely of family business affairs, requiring our regular contributions at the middle and the end of each year, and on occasions such as the anniversaries of our departed relatives. Beyond that business relation, I have had nothing to do with the clergy of the temple. The head priest is a modest, middle-aged gentleman. At the seventh-day ceremony of my late mother-in-law, he offered to Buddha a big round tub of living loaches wriggling and twisting their small snake-like bodies in the water. While he chanted the sutras, he scattered white and pink artificial lotus petals all over the temple hall. The offering of living loaches meant that, after the ceremony was over, when the live creatures were turned loose in a river, human mercy towards every living thing, such as birds, fish, and even insects, would be demonstrated, that Buddha would be pleased, and that the salvation of the newly departed spirit would be assured. I do not know what this scattering of lotus blossoms signified, but it added to the picturesqueness of the ceremony, which was very elegant, if artificial. Undoubtedly one function of the clergy, as professionals, is to sell the Buddhist ceremony to the satisfaction of their customers, who desire different formalities on different occasions. This Pure Land sect, to which my husband's family belongs, is unlike my own family's Zen sect. While a rigorous practice of Stoicism is preserved in the latter, the former is very worldly. Honen Shonin, the founder of the Pure Land cult, recognized the human nature of the priesthood, permitting them to marry and to eat meat and fish, whereas in the Zen temples no woman, no meat, and in some of them no alcohol even is allowed. I love the clean atmosphere of a Zen temple, where the great priests are really men of high culture and profound scholastic attainments. In the Pure Land sect, on the contrary, the priesthood is usually an inherited family profession, and I have often seen baby clothes hanging in rows behind its temple, and young and old women chattering in the priest residential quarter behind the altar room. There is no assertion of subtle individual faith in any of the Japanese religions. A Japanese woman born in a family which belongs to the Zen sect, and married to a family belonging to the Pure Land sect, has naturally to follow her husband's family religion, never thinking faith a personal issue. There is no such complication for her as in the case of a Catholic girl married to a Protestant man. The Pure Land sect is one of the 6 largest among more than a dozen Japanese Buddhist sects now in existence. Honen Shonin, not satisfied with the mere aesthetic teaching of Buddhism, founded it in 1175. His beloved disciple Shinran then started his own sect called Jodo Shinshu. These two together are called the Amida sect. It believes in salvation through the grace of Amida given freely to all who have faith in him, an analogy to our Heavenly Father in Christianity. The ritual of the Amida cult is simple and emotional. One has only to repeat the name of Amida, Namu Amida, Namu Amida, Namu Amida, Namida Namu Amida Butsu, with all one's heart, whether walking or standing, whether sitting or lying down, but there must be no cessation of the practice, for, as the founder of the sect said, these words must be recited almost breathlessly. Honen and Shinran, the founders of the two branches of the Amida sect, stressed that point that faith means complete trust in Amida, a doctrine similar to that advanced by St. Paul and Martin Luther. By grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. Faith, which means complete trust in either Buddha or God, and renunciation of self-help, may be fascinating to religiously minded persons, but it is difficult for the logical-minded. The way of salvation shall be given even to the ignorant or the sinful if they merely repeat, Namu Amida Butsu. This is naturally an attractive gospel, and there are, it is said, more than 26 million Japanese chanting Namu Amida almost instinctively. The sect has nearly 30,000 temples and 50,000 professional clergymen. It is the greatest religious force of Japanese society today. If not keenly logical myself, I aspired to find a logical faith. My quest continued.